Hello, welcome. Fireside with Peter Adkison. I'm Peter Adkison. My co-host is Emma Larkins, and our guest today is Skaff Elias, and we are streaming live on Gen Con TV from Chaldea Studios. On this show, as you might know, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games, and we are continuing our coverage of Magic the Gathering. So our guest today, Skaff, was on our show a few months ago, and as soon as the show was done, Skaff said to me, we barely got into any of the good stories. And so it's like, okay, then we got to do the show over. So here we are. We're back to, how you doing, Skaff?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for the coffee.
You're welcome.
Do-over. Great. Off to a great start.
Thanks for coming. Hey, yeah, by the way, check out our new coffee cups. Yeah.
How long is
Oh,
this?
Yeah, there's also the Gen Con logo over here. Yes, what?
How long is the show?
The show's an hour.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we won't finish even today. Okay.
Probably not. Okay, so what we're going to start with today is we're mainly going to focus today's story on, or show on stories behind organized play programs. So Skaff was very instrumental, very much one of the founding fathers and mothers. Well, I think we're an eight. Well, anyway. So
Founding parents.
Founding parents of Magic the Gathering organized play. And so we're going to focus in on that. So let's dive right into it. And to kind of set the stage, let's talk about what we were doing in Magic before the Pro Tour, before the organized play became a really big priority for Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering. I feel like we always had sort of in our blood this idea of Magic being a competitive game. I mean, we were not as clear and focused around that idea at the beginning, but pretty much from the beginning, we were always running tournaments. I remember in Gen Con in 1993, we had a tournament.
World Championship.
I might have called it a World Championship. This was at the show the Magic was released.
Yeah.
So it probably doesn't carry much validity, but you know, you could say
You can call
this
anything a World
It was
Championship.
I think it was a Plague Rat deck. Do you remember this game?
I don't. I'm not sure I was at the '93 one. I don't think I was. Probably a family reunion or something like
Probably. Yeah. Okay. Before you got your
might have-
priorities straightened out.
that. Might have been. Yeah.
Okay. So
So there is a '93 champion,
there was a 93
world champion.
a world champion. Maybe we should put air
And
quotes.
what was her name?
I don't.
There.
I don't. I don't remember his name. I remember he won with a Plague Rat deck.
I've heard
And
about this.
there's a picture floating around. I've seen a picture as recently as the last decade with Richard Garfield and this guy. I know him when I see him. I thought, oh yeah, that's the guy that had the.
He wasn't one of your employees.
No, he was not a Wizards of the Coast employee.
All right.
Yeah. The employees weren't in the tournament, probably. Maybe.
93 probably could have been.
Could easily have been. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, it wasn't too long after that that we started to codify some systems for Magic competition.
Right.
And
The DCI.
yeah. So, what do you remember any of that stuff?
I do. I wasn't.
Peanut gallery over here.
I wasn't exactly involved in that, but I remember it. Yeah, I do.
No, so no stories
I
from
do
that
remember it.
era.
Well, I will say that there were a lot of rules there in the organized play system that we, and by we I mean like sort of the East Coast playtest group and Richard didn't like. A lot of rules that we didn't like. And so, like one of them was, I think deck size minimums maybe went up. I think Richard, in the beginning, if I remember, had a minimum. There was a published deck size minimum of 40, but maybe.
Yeah, well,
then
that was in the first rules, right? The original
first
Magic
rules,
Gathering
but then I
rules
think
was
it
40.
got bumped up to 60.
Right.
And that was okay with him because there was already the minimum published in there. And he actually wanted there to be no minimum, and then, I don't know, in 2 seconds we had a deck that always won on the first turn because, you know, channel fireball kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So he agreed to the minimum. And then the thing that happened was the 4-card limit. and
yeah.
Richard was extremely, extremely opposed to that.
Interesting.
The limit of only being able to have four
Four
of
of
a
a
specific card,
copy.
because it killed decks like Plague Rat decks.
Killed decks like Predators.
Right.
And the thing is, like in retrospect, I mean, Richard's not right 100% of the time, and he was definitely wrong on that one. I think, in fact, to the point where I believe it's in the just standard rules about the 4-card stuff for constructed thing.
Oh, yeah,
I think it's like a
absolutely.
magic rule, not just a tournament rule.
Yeah.
So that one was, and I think Steve Bishop was. If Steve Bishop wasn't the one that created that, he was certainly the one responsible for the propagation of that rule. I don't know if
And he was in charge of the
he was in charge of the
DCI
DCI
at
and
that
and
time.
started the original organization, and so that was like a great thing that really, obviously was required.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's the balance of, maybe Richard looking at a perspective of what's fun. I'm playing with my friends. We're not trying to trounce
Right.
each other. We want to have a balanced game. But in a competitive setting, right, you're going to take whatever edge you can get.
Richard had that philosophy as long as he was winning.
Yeah, yeah. fair.
But
Okay.
he really it was almost specifically like the Plague Rat deck that really sort of bothered him about
Yeah,
that, and
yeah.
he wondered if there were some other way around it. And it's not that there couldn't have been. It's mostly that's just the most expedient thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a simple rule, right?
Right.
You could just say no more than 4 of a good card.
Yeah.
And in some sense, I think the designers over the years were able to overcome possible weaknesses of that rule by creating similar cards
Sure.
functionally
Yeah.
Right.
that had different names.
Right, you could have cards that keyed off, and these were created. I don't think they were used in a competitive deck, but cards that keyed off the total number of rats, not plague rats. So
Right.
after the first plague rats would never work that way. They could feed the others, but they wouldn't key off the others, and then all the other ones could act like plague rats from then
Yeah.
on.
Right. Right.
So
You
yeah,
had-
absolutely.
you had kobolds had that sort of thing going on, and a whole bunch of things.
Right, and then there was the banned and restricted lists, and those things again were controversial back then. And I believe my memory could be wrong, but I believe that both the 4-card limit and the bans and restrictions were from the original DCI people. I don't think we came up with those, and I know Richard was eventually, like fairly quickly, he realized that they were necessary, but initially he was against them, and so those were kind of good things. I mean, I think the restricted list in particular really was a bad compromise for the long run, because it great compromise in the short run, because people got to use their cards.
And why don't you refresh us all on what the difference was between a restricted list and a banned
A
list
banned card is like you just can't use this card.
Yeah.
in tournament play?
Right, and then restricted is you're allowed to have one copy of it.
Okay. And to be clear, obviously people could do whatever they want at home, but
Yeah.
in terms of a sanctioned tournament, a Wizard of the Coast sanctioned tournament, those were
Right.
The rules.
Okay, and for limited play, like if you're drafting or
Yeah.
something, there were no restrictions
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
any, because you
Right.
So yeah, so the ban list was a great short-term compromise. People got to play with their cards like Black Lotus and stuff, but they didn't necessarily dominate.
Right.
Like it wasn't like first turn kill after first turn kill kind of
Right.
thing. And then of course it turned out that they did sort of dominate, and then the price on those cards really shot way up. So it was very difficult for someone of normal means to be competitive.
And so we're talking about an era of really around like the first year of Magic, maybe first 18 months of Magic. So Magic comes out in the summer of '93, and in my mind, I think of the era of going from there into Fallen Empires into '94, the first 18 months
Right.
of Magic.
Almost first 2 years, really, to be honest.
You have a question from the chat. If you want
Yes.
to
Oh, yes, please.
tap into that before we move onwards. What were the original philosophies of early bans and restrictions? Why would a card be restricted, banned versus not?
Oh, okay. So some of the bans were easy because those were ones that involved ante.
Oh, right.
So,
yeah, we talked about that.
The tournament rules, again, Richard really wanted people to play with ante, but that's a thing like where it was actually amazing, because we certainly played that way all the time in our play tests, but then as soon as it got out into the world, man, people just really didn't want to play for Annie.
Hated it.
I mean, there
And
was
then you get someone's card. For
No,
that.
Right,
And
Andy is so obscure now that it bears an explanation.
Yeah.
Andy, in the original Magic the Gathering, we go to sit down to play. We each shuffle our cards and then take the top card off of each deck and put them aside. So those 2 cards are out of the game, and whoever wins the game gets to keep both cards. For real, for keeps.
For keeps.
For keeps.
Yeah.
It was influenced by the game Marbles,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the thing about that was, if you have to remember the early days, we didn't really expect people to buy a lot of cards for there to be a secondary market and anything like that. It was supposed to be like, oh, you get a deck, he gets a deck, I get a deck, we all play with each other.
Yeah.
And so it was a way of enforcing, change in the decks.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
and so that was nice, and that was pretty cool. And then in the real world, people were like, not gonna do that.
Yeah.
That's not.
You know,
Gonna
I don't think I ever really knew that the idea behind Ante, other than just being fun, was to
Yeah.
to cause the environment to evolve
Yeah.
in a play group.
Yeah, and it was. I'm not saying it wasn't for fun, but it was.
Yeah.
And we should have been able to figure this out, because in the tournaments there, where we were playing, like in the math and physics department, people would say, "Do you want to play a game?" And the rule was you had to Annie. That was just the rule. And then we would say, "Let's play, but let's not play for Annie." And actually, even the games we would play among ourselves. I'm not 100% sure about Richard, but certainly the people on the side.
Everybody else, when Richard wasn't around.
No, but it's not that
every
every game would be without
Right.
ante, but a lot of
Okay.
very high percentage were without ante. So those cards, when it turns out people don't really like it, and there's pockets of people that love it, and in our store I played it and we love it, but in general around
people
the
didn't like it.
people
Okay.
really didn't like it. So those cards easy to ban because they referred to something that wasn't the game.
Yep.
The second type of card that was easy to ban was the physical cards.
Oh.
Like a chaos orb, and you tossed it and that sort of stuff.
The tear it up
And-
one.
That was a question. That was a question. Yeah, and so
We did not think that up, I don't think. I think that was some fan. I think that came up in a tournament.
Oh, because you.
It
Right,
was
yeah.
just like you flip the card and land any card.
Whatever
that-
it touches as written.
And people would they would play the game and put all the
Yeah,
cards as
it-
far away as possible, so you could never get more than one of them.
card.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
the set of rules
ridiculous.
adjudicating the chaos orb was longer than the rest of the rules combined. And so it was like, okay, how about we just
Yeah.
get rid of it? Right. So those were easy. And then those were the bans. And then the restricteds were the ones that were just super powerful, and essentially mostly the ones that could lead to like first turn kills.
Yep.
Which would make the game more random. So if they're dispersed out through the deck, it's less likely for that to happen. And so the lotuses, the moxes, the draw cards, the channels, that sort of thing. That's the general philosophy.
Yep, yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so let's get to at some point in time or a phase of time, we sort of in the wake of fallen empires. Maybe it's fair to say, the company goes through this shift that says we need to rethink organized play. And I'll briefly say, sort of from where I was sitting, Fallen Empires was a debacle. Q.
Debacle?
Just like Richard is not right 100% of the time. Same with Peter.
Okay.
There you go.
He's totally wrong on this one. But
So
that's
it's a
okay.
victory. It's a great success.
From my perspective, it was a great success.
Great success.
Okay, so let's defend that.
Successful
defend that, because
debacles?
we've talked about Fallen Empires a number of times on
Yeah.
the show as this point when the supply catches up with the demand. Everybody's overordered. There's way too much product. The people are coming to me and say, Peter, unless you want to own the entire hobby game industry, you got to cut deals with these distributors and let them off the hook. Okay, that's explain that success.
Don't know why you didn't want to own the entire hobby industry.
Yeah, that sounds great.
No, because the
I
thing
never wanted to be in retail.
the thing was, mainly, I would just look at things from the perspective of really not the company or the designers or anything, but like, who's your average fan?
Yeah, yeah.
And at one point that was the average 18-year-old, and then probably pretty close to the time of Fallen Empires, with distribution in the comic book stores happening around then, starting at least, it was the average 12-year-old or whatever.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
And they just couldn't buy the game. They couldn't play the game. Like my cousins or whatever couldn't afford the cards. You would go to local shops in Philadelphia and people couldn't play. And because it was all speculators buying up the cards. Everything was over retail. And I don't know. I mean, it was just terrible. I know Richard felt terrible about it. We talked about it, certainly. And also, we had done research on things like the trading card crash and the comic book crash and all that sort of stuff. And fundamentally, the product was, I don't know what percentage of our sales were. I guess you could figure out by how much we overprinted Fallen Empires. But the product was, a large portion of the buying was done by speculators and collectors.
Yeah.
And so we were never going to be able to be in control of the price of our product. Unless we broke that whole cycle. And there's only one way to break that cycle. I mean, you could ask them nicely to not buy extra cards, I guess.
Just not.
Or you could have them lose a bunch of money. I mean, those were sort of the choices. And even the expansion right before Fallen Empires was the Dark, and that was still allocated, and that was, in my opinion, really bad. And I did not like it, and so it was sold at above retail. If you had a crystal ball and you knew exactly how much to print so that maybe people only lost a little bit of money, and I don't know.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't possible. And also the other thing too was we didn't, even with Fallen Empires, I believe the tail end of the print run wasn't shipped or was destroyed or something maybe.
Yeah, I think it came in 6 waves, and if I remember correctly, by the time the third wave out of 6 happened, by the time they're receiving that third shipment, they're up in arms going, we've got too much. And but of course, they're also saying that with the knowledge that there being 3 more shipments coming after that. Right. And so we, I think we were able to cancel certainly the last shipment, maybe the last 2. Right. And we had to, so we did deals all the way up and down the distribution chain in terms of deals with distributors on how much they would have to pay for what they ordered. We did it with Carta Monday, let us off the hook to some extent on some of it. I mean, we managed to try to spread the pain out through the distribution system.
And there was going to be pain, and I don't necessarily think I fully appreciated how much pain other people would feel, and I did not care. So that was part of it. But again, the thing was, for the first time, and in terms of the number of people playing the game, it just went up, and it wasn't just Fallen Empires. Not long out. I mean, the 4th edition and all that. So that was overprinted too, and so was whatever, I don't know, Chronicles probably, and Ice Age and whatever. We just kept printing cards, and we kept printing cards until it was, hey kid, you can just go buy a card if you want to. Yeah. You don't have to, you don't have to sell your bike to buy a deck. And
it made it more accessible.
Much more accessible.
To play it.
Yeah, and absolutely. So I agree with you that
it's going to was going to have to happen. I mean, people don't understand this. It had to happen.
Right.
Eventually.
Right. Yeah. I think when I think of the debacle, I think of it from the terms of like it was awkward. It wasn't very elegant. Like we could have gotten to the same point a bit more elegantly, maybe. But anyway,
maybe.
But let's. So what comes out of that is a conscious focus on the company that we want to embrace competitive play and not be always chasing the speculator and the collector. And there were people in the company who had well articulated arguments. People in senior management who were like, no, let's just manage the speculation thing. It's really always important that
very much so.
It's a collectible, and we're not here to shame anybody, but there were people that were very invested in the idea that for Magic to be successful, we had to always undersupply the market, and so that there would be this frenzy of to buy it
because they wanted it to be hot.
Yeah.
Hot.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's like they. The people there were business people.
Yeah.
And they were trying to manage it as a business. And I think some people there had more confidence in it as a game.
Right.
So it's like, just if it's a good game, just let people play the game kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I will say, probably got lucky. Maybe it was an irrational overconfidence. But it doesn't matter. That's how much confidence we had. And so fundamentally, we're like, at all costs, make it so that people can play.
Yeah.
And
what you mean by that is that people
Price.
can buy it at
Buy
retail.
it.
can buy it at retail,
At MSRP.
and not just that, but that the formats of play, and this goes into your OP thing,
Right.
the formats of play where we tried to push limited, we tried to push standard. Eventually, this is like a year later than this, but where they were always just the last couple years worth of cards. We knew the whatever average life cycle of someone in the game was a couple years, so we said, okay, well, the cards from the last couple years is what's going to be legal. You may have to buy some when you first came in, but more or less it was just buy as you go, the stuff at retail, and reduce the number of expansions that were coming out. There were so many coming out, and just try to reduce the burden as much as possible on the players, almost to the point of like keeping it at the minimum level in terms of what the players could have and still keep the game interesting.
Can we do a quick sidebar
Yeah,
based off of that?
sure.
So interestingly, this all paid off in that Magic was recently inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame. So do you have any thoughts, like toy specifically, you push this to such a, and this is a question from chat, for being a toy, for a thing to play with and being recognized as such?
There's probably some toys in the Toy Hall of Fame. I don't really know what the Toy Hall of Fame is that are speculative things, like I don't know, or Cabbage Patch Kids in the Toy Hall of
Beanie
Fame.
Babies?
Beanie Babies. I mean,
Yeah,
so those would be more in the. I don't know that I don't know enough about Toy Hall of Fame to know if.
I'm going to be a real ass here.
Oh, gosh,
I'm going to speculate and be kind of an ass on this because I think that's just the toy industry catching up with us a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, there's kind of games before really good games came out. Back in the days of our parents or our childhood, games were things that were toys. I mean, basically, they were marketed in the toy. They were in the toy section of the retail stores. There weren't game store, and there weren't very many. There were real game stores like we like to go to were fringe sort of things, right? And so there is sort of some history of games just being another toy.
Yeah. Toy.
They're just toys. Yeah. Well, you could tell what I think of that.
All right. Back to the past.
So okay. So as we're going through this shift within the company to focus on competitive play, what do you remember from that year? Any?
Well, so you said it. I think the seeds of it were before Fallen Empires, to be honest, as far as the competitive play stuff goes. The people who were in charge of organized play then may have disagreed with some of the stuff we wanted, but like even way back in, say pre-Fallen Empires, the fall of '94, we wanted it to be had these dreams of it being a serious competitive thing.
Right.
So, and then, a year after that is when I think we really were able to start it, for real, trying to move along those lines and starting the plans for the Pro Tour and everything like that.
Right.
So, yeah, I the two dominant thoughts there were, one, sort of, I guess, it being an intellectual sport. We always talked about it being an intellectual sport.
Yeah.
And so we really went the sport path, not the game path. And that was the big thing. And I mean, this, but it was almost like a secret cabal or something like that. Like Rick Ahrens was this guy who was working on the Duelist magazine at the time.
Right.
But he came from a sports background.
Okay.
And so, we would just...
He had a magazine called Junior Tennis, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's how.
Yeah.
We met him when he was doing John Jordan met him at the pre-press shop, doing layouts of his magazine. Started talking sports.
Yeah.
Well, magazines, probably. Sorry,
magazines,
right?
Yes.
Because he was brought on to run our magazine because he was a magazine guy.
Okay.
Right.
But he wasn't a magazine guy; he was a sports magazine guy. So anyway, so that's really, we would just. Just talk about that all the time, the sports aspect of it. and
So it's more than competitive play. This idea of really rebranding Magic the Gathering to be an intellectual sport, and to come up with a plan for marketing it. And so even though the roots of organized play ran deep in the company, this idea of embracing it as a sport, was not immediately popular within the company. Like you said, like a secret cabal. There were not. I felt like I didn't have a lot of support in this, although I had support from the strongest part of the company, which was Richard, who was Richard Garfield, the inventor of the game and the biggest shareholder of the company. He was certainly on board, and the thought leaders in R&D were on board.
Well, it's the age-old conflict between nerds and jocks, right? I'm sure that a lot of people within the company saw themselves more on
I don't think there were any jocks.
There. Well,
But yes, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's
having
just-
this connotation.
Right.
I mean, there's people.
Age-old conflict between nerds pretending to be jocks and the
Yeah.
other nerds.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that goes along with it. There's a lot of conflict between the two concepts, right? Like one is more like open, like we're all gonna have fun together, and one is we're gonna compete together. We're gonna rank each other. There's a lot of tension
Yeah.
between those.
Yeah. So how did this become like? How did this kind of start with you and Rick? I mean, Richard, of course, was on board.
So I think we
but,
had talked about it. I had talked about it before, probably before I talked about it with Rick, with like Richard. But then I don't know. Probably just hanging out late one night. I don't know. There's probably some magazine deadline that was late, and there was not that many people were there at whatever midnight or 1 a.m. But certain people
there
were.
was
R&D.
somebody
There was
there.
always somebody there. R&D was there and working, and then so were the magazine people because they had deadlines and stuff like that.
right.
So maybe it was at one of
Right,
those points.
right.
I don't know, but.
And the reason we keep mentioning Rick Ahrens is because Rick Ahrens ends up organizing.
Yeah, he becomes the head of.
He becomes the head of organized play. But first, we kind of had to realize that he was the guy to do that, and
Or willing to do that anyway.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
I mean, you guys started coming up with this plan at some point, and
Yeah, and it's interesting because it really was separate from the regular DCI because people, it's not just like, the people in DCI didn't want to put money on it. Nobody in the company did outside of, I don't know, 4 or 5 people, and then the 4 or 5 people that were hired specifically to do it. I mean, it was a very small amount of people at the company out of hundreds of people that actually thought this was a good idea. And so, it's not like, there's this one group of people that said no money and they didn't want any of these complicated ranking systems and all this sort of stuff. No, they were in the majority, and it's not just them, it's the people in the real world. Today it's hard for people to imagine because all these games have sort of professional leagues associated with them. But then there was nothing. I don't think there was any proprietary game that had money tournaments. There's poker and whatever, but no. So this was a totally new thing, and to sum it up, it's like I think we felt that the game was deep enough that someone could spend a lot of time and money on it, and like they would with any sport that they do.
Yeah.
More than like, say, you would on Monopoly. I don't know how much you can play Monopoly and keep getting better at it, but these were things that were associated with, like actual real sports.
Yeah.
And you could just keep going forever and ever and ever. And, okay, well, how do you justify to yourself that you're going to spend that amount of time and money? Because we really felt the game was good enough to do that. And what makes it a legitimate pursuit? And then from our end, it was pretty easy because it was a competitive activity. It's like, well, this is America, and the thing that legitimizes anything is money.
Money, yeah.
And I mean, really, honestly, it's that simple. And it's just like, okay, well, that's how you know that that we as a company feel that it's worth your time. We'll give you $1 million. And then how do you feel it's worth your time? How do you justify it to your family and to your friends? It's like, well, I go to a local tournament or I go to a Pro Tour qualifier and I come home with $500 from first place. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, I remember there's a story that I think it was Worth Wolpert, who was an employee we hired later. And he's on his football team. people would tease him about playing high school football team. People would tease him about playing cards, and then like one time he comes back and he won a PTQ or whatever, finished second, and it's like they're joking, and then he's like, "Well, what did you do this weekend?" "Well, I just won $500, you know." And then all of a sudden, like all the people stop talking.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, "Oh wow, really
That's
cool. Oh hey, you know, can I play Magic?" And
Tell me
sort of thing.
more.
Yeah, and so so it really worked at the local level, and that's where Rick was like super instrumental, because he knew like how to promote those people, and through like with tennis and how tennis promotes its stars and all that sort of stuff.
But your big thing was you had to convince the company to spend millions, at least $1 million on this.
We didn't really have to convince the company. We had to convince Peter.
Peter, you had to convince Peter.
Well, he was convinced, but he, you know, it wasn't like, okay, the company's doing this. It was like a side group.
Right. It was, and so I remember feeling very alone in this. And I want to also say that I'm sure there were people out in the company who thought it was a good idea. I just didn't know who they were. The people that I was talking to, aside from Richard and Skaff and Rick, who were kind of the secret cabal, you know, other people were like just looking at me and going, "This is like crazy. Why do you want to do this? Like, this is not the way we should." You know, we should continue to operate this as a collectible, and figure out the strategy of how to always short the market. And to me, that just didn't seem very sustainable.
Yeah.
Like it just, and it seemed kind of, ugh.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of gross. And so I also I wasn't very experienced in business. Certainly not at the beginning. I had no experience in business. But by 1995, I was starting to have some experience in how to run a big organization. And it was like I learned that when you want to get something through an organization that isn't popular, it's really difficult, because everything, you have to work through management, and if people don't agree with it, they're not going to go with it. And so I went to Vince, who was on our board of directors, and he was a guest on Fireside a few months ago. At the time, Vince was on our board of directors. He wasn't in the company yet. And I went to him and I said, I got this problem. I think the company needs to go this way, but hardly anybody agrees with me. But the people that do agree with me are Richard and Skaff, and I think probably a couple of the other R&D guys were supportive as well. And this new guy, Rick Ahrens, you don't know him yet, but he's great. And blah, blah, blah. And so he says, okay, well, this is what you got to do. You've got to form a separate organization and give that organization the responsibility to do this. Have that organization be led by somebody who is passionate about it and believes in it, and have that person report directly to you. That's
easy.
Well, it was
so simple.
It's simple if you know it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like
it's great that Vince was there. I mean,
Vince,
thank goodness he was on the board.
Thank goodness. Yeah. And so that's how we got this thing started. Is we formed this organized play program. We put Rick Ahrens in charge, and Rick Ahrens reported to me, and we got. So
Rick, like the original guys that worked on it, Rick hired these people. He just went to UW. I don't know, probably knocked on the doors of the hallway, or stuck a little whatever 3x5 card up. Post-it note. Yeah, jobs. Who wants a job?
We had David Hoppy on the show.
Right.
Yeah, who's the president of Gen Con now.
Yeah.
So it was one of these things where people come and do career opportunities and local businesses type of things or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
the career fair.
Career fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
Thankfully, Emmett was there.
Do you want to be an accountant, or do you want to play games for a living?
Yeah.
Your choice.
Yeah. So three of the people were like just students that made a mistake.
Sorry. We thought this was something different.
Yeah. Well, I think it worked out pretty well for David Hoppy. I have no idea what happened to the other ones.
It's like in poker. You can make a bad choice and it can turn out okay. I'm not saying it didn't turn out great for those people.
Okay. So they made a bad choice.
But like, can you imagine today, like if your kids at the business were like, hey, we're at this business fair and there were a lot of banks that wanted to hire me, and then there's a game company in Seattle. No, in Renton. And it's got some people, and they seem like they are desperate. and they don't know anything about business, which is the great part. They know nothing about business, so that they're willing to hire like first-year students. We don't even have our MBAs yet, I don't think. Like, just hire first-year students because they really need the knowledge. I really think I can help these guys. Yeah, go for it. You go work for those people. Anyway, they did, luckily, because they were great.
Yeah. Mark Weither, Todd Bazakis, David Hoppy.
That's the three that were the first came.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple other people that Rick knew.
along,
Right.
Yeah, and so Rick ended up hiring, Susan Shine, Karen Krisman.
Yeah, and the Clipper, Kevin
Kevin
Klipstein, right?
Yeah,
And then
right.
and then the other Kevin. There's another Kevin too. Those two Kevins were from this. Clipper was like a squash player, I think, and the other Kevin was involved in either tennis or golf or something. Anyway, so and all of those guys were, I think they were kind of sort of more sports mentality. Especially several of them actually played sports, and so. So we went on, we did a lot of research. That's the thing. It wasn't just like this half-cocked idea that was implemented. It was a half-cocked idea that was researched and then implemented.
Explain to me sports.
Yeah.
What is this sports thing?
So, no, we went around. We actually hired a bunch of sports consultants. There was Seth Maitlands, who is a super smart guy from this thing called Pro Service Sports Agency.
Right.
I think he was Pro Service. Anyway, and we talked to the baseball guys, ex-MLB, the head of marketing for MLB, who had left MLB, and then we met with him, and a whole bunch of other sports consultants. And people in the industry, and because Rick had a lot of these connections through the magazine and the tennis and everything like that. And so, and then just, of course, with the chess and the bridge, the more direct parallels.
Yeah.
And so we just spent a long time and money, so thanks for that, hiring these people and traveling and meeting with them and learning everything we could about really every individual sport that we knew. So, tennis and golf on the sports side, chess.
And I
things like
remember
that.
tennis being interesting because it's structurally primarily a one-on-one duel,
Yeah.
like Magic is,
Right.
and like chess and
Right.
is,
And your pitch to these people when you're meeting is we're going to invent a sport.
Our pitch to these people when we're meeting is, here's some money, give us some advice. And they're like,
How to
"Yeah,
invent a sport."
We'll take your money.
Yeah.
But yes, that's essentially correct. Yeah.
Because for, baseball, tennis, these games have been around for...
a while.
Yeah.
So the strategy comes together, and we decide, okay, like this is how the company is going to pivot. We're going to do this, and I think sort of the big sort of first thing for the public would have been the first Pro Tour. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the public first sees it at the first Pro Tour. That's right.
So what?
I don't.
Any stories from the first Pro Tour, Skaff?
A lot of stories from the first Pro Tour.
Okay.
First Pro Tour. So did you mention Karen?
Yeah.
Chris? Okay.
Uh-huh.
So she was in charge, I believe, at the time, and the first Pro Tour was, behind the scenes. We had worked on it for a long time. The thing going into it, but and then
It was at the Armory, right, in New York?
it was at the Armory in New York,
Yeah.
and it was a call-in because we didn't really have any other way because the DCI wasn't doing what we wanted to with the rating system. It wasn't super legitimate.
Right.
There was like this limitation on how many tournaments you can run. It was a point accumulation system. So again, one more time, the theme there is if you have the money to travel to a bunch of events and play in a bunch of things, or if you had the time to spend, and so it wasn't really necessarily finding the most skilled people.
Right.
So we would need eventually to switch the rating system over, and I honestly forget if we had switched it over to an ELO system like chess uses by that time, but if we didn't, it was, even if we had switched over by then, we didn't have enough data.
Yeah.
So it was a call in fastest fingers was how you got into the first Pro Tour. We had invited several people like previous world championships and anyone champions except the first guy.
Yeah.
Who never got called
You forgot
back.
his
Oh.
Plague Rat.
forgot his name.
Plague
Plague
Rat
Rat guy. Right. So Zach Dolan, I think, and then Bertrand Lestrade was one of the French guys that was there, and then so a whole bunch
Probably
of people.
all three of those French guys that were there.
Probably all three.
Yeah.
And then so anyone that we knew to be good, we handed out a personal invite if they had won whatever. created some sort of cockamamie criteria, like, oh, they won a whatever, I don't know, regionals, nationals, finished third in whatever.
Yeah.
Anyone, but then that was actually a small percentage. From then on, it was fastest fingers, and that was the first one that seeded it. And then from then on, I think it was a lot more legitimate.
People just call you and ask for a ticket.
No, it was just like the first whatever 100 people or I forget how many were at the first Pro Tour. It was over 100, but something like that.
So the first one might not, but I mean, from there, we developed the whole criteria for how you can become a pro player through by placing in a previous Pro Tour or having a certain ranking.
Qualifier system.
Qualifiers, stuff like that.
So the qualifier, to get the people to run the qualifiers, you sort of need the first one because no one wants to run a qualifier other way or participate in it. But once you run the first one, then people are like, oh, this is something I want to do. So we couldn't really set up qualifiers before the first one. It was very cold in New York in February or whatever it was, January, February. And Jerry Rubin was, I think, from Sidelines. They were the outside company that put it all together. And I remember, like, I was in probably sandals and shorts because I usually am. Back then, I hadn't ripped my feet up, so I could still wear sandals. I didn't need orthotics. And it was cold. I mean, there was snow everywhere. And I was on the roof of that building with them, with like baling wire, attaching banners and stuff. And it was, And then a lot of people were late getting there because of the weather. So I think that was, we maybe learned possibly not to have a tight 3-day event where people have to fly from all over the world and hold it in New York in February. So,
learning experience.
Well, it's funny, Toy Fair hasn't figured that out yet.
Wow.
So,
Well, right, but they're not, you don't have to compete.
You just gotta set up your booth.
And also so another thing, right, is that's interesting because we did learn this, right? At Toy Fair, there's big companies selling products.
Right.
They have a business account and can afford to, it's their job to take time off. Whereas these people, right, because we didn't have a class of, and this is something we worked really hard to across the course of the Pro Tours, we wanted there to be professional Magic players.
Yeah.
And obviously, before the first event, there aren't any. And so we worked really hard at trying to make life easier for these people if they wanted to be a professional gamer. And that was a huge amount of the focus. That led to a lot of the decisions that we made in terms of how much money we were putting on the events, how far down it went. We don't know how much to put on the events or how deep to pay until we see how consistent the winners are. But then we want the top level of winners, even though they're not winning every time, finishing in a certain range. What's that range? Then you know how much to pay down to them, how much you want to put on the qualifiers, how much. Eventually, there was the Masters Tour or whatever, which purely just a means of getting extra money to these people, so there could be this class of professional player. So that drove a lot of the decisions.
Right.
Mostly thinking of those people, from an aspirational perspective, how well you could promote them. Are you going to get consistent winners? And we had a lot of tools at our disposal where it's like, well, if you're not getting consistent enough winners, at best, 2 out of 3, you can go best 3 out of 5. If we need to, we can go, best out of 7, best of 9. Luckily, we didn't have to go that far to get the amount of consistency we wanted. But we were able to do a lot of dials. If formats turned out to be too random, then we wouldn't want to do them. But all of it was, almost everything we invented was the purpose of the formats that people were playing was to promote what we felt was good for the people at the lowest level, like the average person in the store. So the recent cards with Type 2, the limited play so that someone could just come in, plunk down $10 and have an equal chance to anyone else, with the qualification that it needed to pass a certain skill bar.
Right.
I think, so.
And you wanted to make celebrities, right? You wanted these people
was very
to
important.
be visible, and you needed them to be consistent, so they would have individuals to look up to.
Very, very important.
You don't want a random new 8 players every
Right.
placed in the top 8 every Pro Tour, right?
Right.
That's a disaster.
And so there's this balance of, like, if you just go, oh, all the things are best out of 7, then your event takes too long and you can invite less people. But if they're best out of 3 for a match, and then eventually best out of 5, you can invite more people and push them through the event, and then your winners are a little more random. So there's always this balance between how many people you're able to include, and the more people you include, the main purpose for that is you kind of don't really care in some sense, other than then you can run more qualifiers. And then you run more qualifiers and push it down to the local level. So for us, in a way, it's almost like the actual Pro Tour itself. One way to think of it is like a black box, and the output is, we have a winner that we can promote, or a few winners we can promote. But the important part isn't actually the tournament. Maybe I'll get in trouble from someone for saying this, but it's its effect on the lower level.
Yeah.
So there's only 2 important things, like the figurehead, who could be, I don't know, whatever, some random dude like John Finkel or whatever.
Just John Finkel.
And,
Justin Gary. There's another one.
Yeah,
something like that.
And then but the important effect is at the lower level. Always at the lower level. That's why we kept trying to increase the size, because it's like run more PTQs, and the PTQs, we don't really care if people show up. The PTQ is an excuse to put cash on a local tournament. And then in some sense, it's better if you know your fill rate from a PTQ is only going to be 50%, because then you can run twice as many and give out twice as many to small cash tournaments, around. And then the same thing with the rating system, right? Is letting ratings be a way, and it's a way for every single local tournament that anyone played at any store, they can then move on to the Pro Tour.
So it's like the kid with a dream, right? Anyone
Right.
has a chance to make it.
Right, and even if you decided to stay at the local level, you could still win money on the PTQs, and you still can get buys into the Grand Prix, which will eventually be local. And even if you never make it to the big stage, you could still make money at the local level. So that was the idea. With the tournament is really the Pro Tour in some sense is just the tool, if that makes sense. It's not the
Yeah. Well, and also I think, it diverted the attention of the world away from this whole thing of speculating and this be a collectible. And if you couldn't flip the case of cards that you bought the next week for 4 times what you paid for it, then it was a failure, right? I mean, you just got everybody away from that.
Right, and so
talking about something else.
At the time, right, a lot of our best players and our most entrenched players, the people that we knew were going to be important for our future success, they had spent a lot of money on cards, and we can't take away their money from them and have the 12-year-old kid be able to play cheaply, because there's this limited resource of these cards. So really, you could think of it as like the Pro Tour was almost like a bribe to the old people.
Interesting, yeah.
Saying like, well, yeah, we know you spent $1,000 on the deck, and it's basically going to be kind of useless now. But you're a great player, and here's $1 million Pro Tour. Go compete in that using only the latest cards.
Because the values of the cards were coming down as they had spent lots of money on this, and they weren't going to be worth as much.
They certainly went down. They went down for a while as we were a lot of the cards that we reprinted in Chronicles and then some in 4th edition. The value of those went down. But so here's the way we knew that we were successful with the Pro Tour. Is on the secondary market, you would think if you reprinted a card that its price would go down, the old black border version of the card. But instead, what happened is, for some of them, obviously we never reprinted the super expensive ones, but for some of them, we would reprint a card, and the black border price of the card would go up. So that makes no sense, right? Except it's like now that old card which you had that was not legal in the standard format.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Now was legal, and back then there was this whole white border black border thing where the white border is ugly. Now that the people don't even know what we're talking about because all the cards are black border, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was this sort of status thing, right? So now I can go and buy an old whatever, I don't know, black border Fireball or whatever it is, and and it's worth more than it was 25 cents, and now it's 35 cents.
Yeah.
Because it's reprinted, or some of the uncommon cards, especially. And so that's really like you've made it, right? Because then the cosmetic effect of the old card is more important than its rarity, because you get to play it in the high-profile formats.
Yeah, yeah, because people play the decks, people see it, it's on television, right? So
Right.
So that was like you knew, like at that point, and that's probably not till '97 or so, but like you just absolutely knew it was a success.
So we are once again running out of time.
All right. We haven't even talked about any of the stories. This is just background.
Tell the stories.
We got 2 minutes.
Tell the stories.
What's a good? We did tell a couple of stories in there. Let's be fair. We want to talk about Ice Age pre-release.
Oh, the Ice Age pre-release, and that was before the Pro Tour.
Yeah, but still part of the organized play. Did we talk about that last time you were on the show? I don't think we did.
I don't think we did.
Yeah.
So
well,
Ice
that's
Age,
a good story.
Ice Age pre-release was, I believe, and I'm not sure, but I believe Corey Smith.
Corey Smith.
Smith,
Right? Mm-hmm.
Big guy, huge guy, awesome guy.
Worked in customer service, right? Or DCI.
Maybe both at certain points
right.
or whatever.
Right.
But I think it was him and it might have been Jason Carl too. I'm not sure. But anyway, there was this tournament in Toronto. A convention in Toronto, and the Ice Age was supposed to come out after that convention. And then between them and some of the organizers of the Toronto convention, they were like, "Hey, maybe can we see some Ice Age cards? Maybe can we get a pre-release of the cards, et cetera, et cetera." And then that developed into the first pre-release tournament. We're like, hey, why not?
And you mentioned Corey because he came up with the idea of
I think he was the one that it was either him that came up with it or him working with the convention people or whatever.
Right.
I believe.
The idea of a tournament where hopefully nobody knows what the cards are.
Yeah, and maybe it wasn't the tournament, but maybe it was just a pre-release something that they came up with or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, then then it snowballs into this thing of where, it's the pre-release tournament. No one sees the cards. You test your skill. You've never seen the cards before, and I don't know. It was maybe 500 people at it or something like that. It was big.
There was like 700 people.
700 people.
Yeah,
That's incredible. And we knew nothing about anything. Not how to manage any of that, the people, the logistics. So we were like designing systems on the fly for how people could play in it and how we could possibly, get through that amount of people. And we sort of,
the idea of it caught the imagination of the company and the players
and the whole whatever world. The world of Magic was really, really because no one had done anything like that before, and also that was like the biggest tournament by far that had been run up to then.
Right.
And I still remember there's this guy Gabe Alonzo, who he was probably in either sales or customer service. It's sales probably, and he went and he used to hang out and play with us. But he's a big guy, really loud voice, a lot of charisma, and I think he was in the army and just like if things are going poorly, the PA system maybe is not working, and how do we organize people and how do we shove people around? And then he just starts yelling. He's like, "Table 1, left side of table 1, everyone stand up," and then they would all stand up. He's like, "Hey, move to the end of the hallway. Table 3, left side, stand up, move to table 1," to switch opponents in the rounds, and it was really cool. And it's just just moving 700 people around with your voice, is pretty cool. And so that's pretty. It worked out okay. And then the coolest part was we wanted the show. You want to tell them about the show of the guards and everything that we had?
So we had the Magic cards. First of all, there was some drama about that. Ellie was on the show. Ellie Howell from sales.
Well, about getting the cards.
About getting the cards.
Whether they were going to be there for this pre-release.
Yeah. So her subtitle for resume now says the savior of Pro Tour or the pre-release. The pre-release Anyway, so we got the cards there very right in the nick of time, and we hired security guards to because
we didn't know what we were doing. I'm glad Ellie did.
There was some drama. I mean, there had been Magic had been around long enough that there had been stories of people being hijacked and robbed for Magic cards and stuff like that, right? And so we had security guards show up with it in a big chest, carried out with we made a big show of unlocking the chest with the cards in it.
Right, because it was like a super valuable thing. It needed to be have armed guards or whatever,
Did you have dry ice for like mist coming out of it? That would have been
Maybe
cool.
so.
It was Canada. It was
It was
cold
cold.
already.
Just your breath. Fair.
And then it was like, oh wow, that's really cool. But 2 minutes before they came out, the thing on a cart was just behind a curtain somewhere, and wheel it out. Here's the guards, and then they just wheel it back, and it's just behind a curtain. No one's guarding it, I'm sure.
Just there.
Yeah. We used to do yeah.
Anyway, it worked.
Yeah.
So
Well, it became throughout history. Just I've been to many pre-releases, and it still has that air of. Even now, when everything is spoiled ahead of time, all the cards, but it still has this air. You're the first person people who get it, being able to play with the cards.
Right.
If you can be at the pre-release, you're better, faster than other people.
Sure.
So it goes into that.
But they're smaller now, right? They're in the stores.
Yeah.
It's to me, there's something missing because I think there's something about the spectacle.
Yeah.
So I would like everyone to be.
I don't think they're all small. I think there are
there's some big ones.
pre-releases
Good, because-
around. Because I think I think it was pre-release. I went to the first Magic event I'd gone to in like 20 years with Brian Lewis, not the attorney, not the voiceover actor, but the YouTube influencer called The Professor. This guy's he's a great guy.
I know. It's just Brian Lewis.
He's got.
Don't Google Brian Lewis and expect to get the Brian Lewis you're trying to Google.
Yeah,
Just
the
look up the
Professor,
Professor.
Tolaria Academy.
Yeah.
He's got a huge following, and he invited me to Magic. I think it was
Nice.
pre-release.
Yeah.
It was in Seattle this summer, and I don't know. It might have been Grand Prix. Hell.
Whatever. Same thing.
They're still big events. They're still great.
There was a lot of people there.
Right. Anyway, I think it's really important for everyone.
There was some spectacle.
I want everyone.
some spectacle.
Well, certainly at Grand Prix there are. I kind of want everyone to go to an event where there's at least 300 people, kind of thing. Like that changes your mind about it. It's like a little kid. If you go to a baseball game, a professional baseball game or football game, it's hard to not be a fan for life. It's much easier to not be a fan and opt out if you're only watching it on TV.
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel like, correctly, hey, there's other people that actually want to do this. I'm not living in my own box.
Yeah.
It just absolutely changes your perspective. So, very valuable for us as a company.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Any more 3-minute story?
Yeah. So, I have a question.
Yeah.
How? It certainly felt at the time that we were doing. Of course, there was an organized play system for chess.
Yeah.
Their chess championships. We all remember when we were kids. When some famous matches. It felt like we were doing something very new, and the idea of there being something for geeks. I remember in school, it was great that sports were for jocks, and to me, it felt like, wow, this is so cool that finally there's something that geeks can compete in and earn money, right? And now we've seen it. Now we see esports. We've seen a lot of it come after. How important do you think Magic the Gathering was in?
So I've heard people. You don't hear people say it anymore, but say in 2005 or 2000, people in the electronics industry would say it a lot to us of like, yeah, you guys started this whole thing. So I don't know how true that is, but it used to be more commonly acknowledged when it was when all that stuff was right on the heels of this. The people that started the electronic pro stuff certainly were, I think, acknowledging that, and a lot of them played Magic and probably played in PTQs and stuff like that.
A lot of WotC people from that era went off to work at video game companies.
That's true.
And they didn't have to invent it from scratch. You mentioned the struggles you went through, just convincing people was a good idea. Other people could look at it and be like, hey, it worked for...
Right. And maybe there were some before that. I think there were certainly world championships of these electronic games before that. I don't know how much money on it was, but it's more of the system and the rating system and pushing the money down to the low levels and having a a professional player. That's
Yeah.
that's sort of the key aspirational thing,
Right,
and then the
right.
fallout to the game. I think that was
And I think that games like chess and bridge, because they weren't proprietary to a company, there
Right.
was no company that had an economic interest in
Right.
creating that structure. Where because we owned Magic the Gathering, we could do. We were interested in. We had a.
Sure.
We were self-motivated.
self-motivated, right? And
make it.
it also gave you this tool to give the money back to the players in some sense. I mean, because the Pro Tour, is run at a loss or whatever. So
Right.
it's you can sort of dial where you want. It's almost like when you buy a Magic card, you're paying a fee to get in the country club or whatever, and then you get this benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more.
Right.
It's kind of like that.
Okay, so we're gonna have to come back with more stories. Like I feel like I didn't
Third
do.
time's a charm.
Well, is
Yeah.
it really too late? Okay,
There.
because there's one more story.
One more.
One more?
One more. Yeah.
One more?
Sure.
One more?
Yeah.
So,
I
it's
mean,
in-
tell it. They might stop the stream, but go ahead.
No, just
Go
stop the
ahead and
stream.
tell it. Tell it.
At the first Pro Tour,
Yeah.
in one of the semifinal matches, it was between Sean the Hammer Regnier
gosh.
and Bertrand Lestrade.
Right.
And it was still going on because we didn't have time limits, and or at least in the single elimination rounds. And so, at least for the first game, certainly. And then, so people would cluster around, and this Seth Maitland guy, who was, professional sports his whole life and an agent and all that sort of thing, and like I remember him watching, and it was just tables, and everyone was gathered around.
Standing on tables.
Standing on tables.
Right.
And it was just intense. It's like, you could just feel the tension and, just sort of like you needed a knife to cut the air practically. And it was, and then I remember after that him saying, he's like, yeah, this can be a sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
and
Pretty cool.
That's
That
cool.
is. That's pretty cool.
Did it. You nailed it.
Nailed it. Right. All right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Skaff.
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you for being on the show.
All right. Thanks for
Yeah,
the coffee.
Yeah. You're welcome. You can keep either one of those cups.
But only one. I only can keep one
Keep
cup.
one.
Keep one. If you come back for more stories, we'll give you one more.
All right. I will
All
do
right.
that.
One per show.
All right. Yes. Thanks. My heart is filled with thanks. Thanks to Skaff for being our guest today. Thanks to Emma Larkins for being my co-host. Thanks to Will Geisler, our technical director, Derek Gooder, our producer, Gen Con TV for being our host, Caldea Studios for being our venue. And, we will be back next week, and I think we decided that's December 11th because we went through a little process of the thing. Well, today's the
That was
4th,
hard.
and I added 6, and I was 7 days in the week. So December 11th, Mark Jessup will be our guest. He worked in Wizard of the Coast marketing for many years, so that'll be interesting. Total topic jump to a new topic. Also, please check out our other shows on Gen Con TV. We have on Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific time, we have the Brothers Murph, and on Fridays at 11 a.m. we have Taggle Tapes and our Industry Roundup, which I think, Emma, you're
Usually not this week though.
oh, not this week. Okay, so, but yeah, so maybe you want to wait another week.
No, it's great. It's great.
No.
What is Derek?
Yes,
Chopped
you'll watch
liver?
it. We'll have Bonsai there. Derek will be out. Yes. Please come and watch our show, and then come back and watch us next week on the 11th at here noon Pacific time on Gen Con TV. All right, that's it. Out. Thanks.
Bye.